Hello, Ken. How are you this fantastic evening?
Oh, Dan, I'm fantastic. This fantastic evening. How about yourself?
Well, the good news is tonight, even though I'm blurry on the screen, we are going old school. What is this all about?
Ah, you may be blurry on the screen, but your voice is clear, and that's what matters the most. So tonight we're going to talk about the way things used to be in some areas and how they are now, and compare and contrast them, and see if people think that one is better than the other. So you and I were talking about champagne a little bit earlier, and I made the point that champagne just can't be made outside of France. It's not possible because there's a region in France. And by the way, this is just fortuitous. A little book called French Wines, uh, the Essential Guide to the Wines and Wine Growing Regions of France. I highly recommend it. Robert Joseph is the author. But there are regions within France, and the wines that are grown there, the grapes that are grown there, the wines that are made there are very specific. They're specific to the region. They're specific to the grapes. There's all sorts of things that factor into why something can be called what it is. Particularly champagne. It's the most reproduced thing in terms of all the wines that France makes. And sometimes it's called sparkling wine, which it should be, because again, if it's not from the region in France, it can't be champagne. And that applies to other French regions as well. They can't call their wine champagne unless they're within the boundaries that describe that particular region. And those are all set by various different regulatory bodies. So as of late, I've been seeing, and I think you've seen, California champagne. But it's not champagne. It's sparkling wine. It may taste delicious, but it's just not what it says it is, because there is a promise that goes along with champagne, that word. And that means that it comes from France, from a specific region, and it's going to contain 1, 2, or 3 types of grapes. That's all it can have in it for it to actually be champagne. So why is this happening? And why does it even matter? And for me, it goes to the whole notion of authenticity. It goes to the notion of this is what it says it is, and it is, as opposed to something trying to copy it and be it when it's not. And it's just not it. And it may not seem like a big deal to people, but I think it speaks to a bigger problem. Why not just own it and call it California sparkling wine and make it the best it can be and compete with champagne? That's easy. Do that. Be proud of it. It's not that, but you might think that California sparkling wine is even better. You might think that it tastes better, that it's got a better aroma, that it's less expensive. There may be all sorts of reasons why that might be a better product. And yet there's this desire to simply latch on to something that someone else has done before you and try to ride their coattails. That's what we're talking about tonight.
So the first thought I have is Prosecco. That is very similar, if not the same, as champagne, but it's not made in Champagne. So I think they just rebranded it and called it Prosecco. Is that accurate? I think I got it accurate. Who knows? But that's one way you can take something that already works and then just say, hey, we have something very similar. We're going up against it with a new name. So maybe that's what they did. But when I think of old school, I think of my father as a coach. And I'm trying to get clear on the screen again, and I'm not very clear on the screen. So if you ever have a chance to watch the YouTube video of this, you can watch me come in and out of clarity on the actual video portion of this. But if you're listening, I probably sound the same throughout that entire sequence of me moving my head to be clear. With that said, I think of old school as my father. I was having a conversation the other day with somebody about coaching styles, and we're talking about sports coaching styles. And I was asked what would be my coaching style if I was a college football coach. And I said I would model it after my father. I would model it after one thing that I think he did really well, which was lay down the ground rules day one. He was not your friend. He was there to say, here's what I expect and demand of you. No exceptions, right? Like arrive on time, follow the rules, do the following, etc. Here are the consequences if you don't follow the rules, if you aren't towing the line, etc. And by the end of the season, he produced championship teams. And people who then moved on to the next level or no longer had him as a coach would look back fondly and say, your dad was an excellent coach. And I think part of the reason is because when you start with this really like rigid, like, I'm not your friend, I'm your coach, I'm here to produce results versus be your friend, that that can work really well, but you can't usually fix it later. Like if you started off like friendly and everything was like, hey, the thing. So anyway, that philosophy though is old school. And that philosophy, as I told my friend this, I would approach it the same way. He said that wouldn't work anymore because we're no longer in the old school. We're in this new era where people would go, I don't like you as a coach. You're too mean. You're too strict. You're too by the book. I'm going to quit your team. I'm going to go find a team that has a new school coach that would approach it very differently. And it makes me also think of, we used to use terms when I was younger. There were teams that we call like all-stars or select, right? They were the best of the best. They were truly that. They were the people that stood out on their team and would make the all-star team, or they would like the select team, like they would select them. They would choose them out of the multitude of people in that league for that sport. And they would say, you're the people we'd like to select to be on this ultra team, this best of the best team that would go on and play other areas, right? And travel and do all this stuff. But the new school is very different. The new school says 8th place trophies should be given and that everybody is part of the select team. And so which is better? It's arguable, but my subjectivity says I like the old school. I think the old school way is better because without standards for things, like standards, whether you call something champagne, without standards, whether like truly you were selected to be on this team because you were the all-star, you were one of the best, we lower our standards where now like everybody's a winner. But truly, is everybody a winner? Because if everybody's a winner, then who's really the standout best of the best? What's really the high quality sparkling wine versus the one that you just imitate and go after? So that's where I think when I think old school. I think about my dad and I think about how much things have changed. We've kind of watered down what used to be really authentic.
So I love that notion of this being about standards, because I think that's really what it comes down to. If we set standards for whatever it is, whether it's how a team plays, who actually wins, who loses, the fact that there are losers. I know it's hard to admit for a lot of people, but sometimes you lose. It doesn't mean you're a loser. It means you lost the game. That's all there is to it, and you don't get a trophy. When I played Little League, our coach, if he thought we played full out, if he thought we played well, win or lose, but if he thought we all gave everything on the field, he'd buy everybody snow cones at the little snow cone hut right afterwards. Even if we won, if he didn't think that we played full out, nothing. We didn't get a thing. And it's like, because you didn't give your all and buy your own snow cone. And so it was like, at first it felt kind of mean, especially if we had won. But then I started to really appreciate it. It's like, yeah, I could have tried harder. I could have done more. We could have scored probably, a couple more runs. And it was a great lesson. I think the same is true, whether it's champagne or whatever it happens to be. If we set a standard and then we expect people to adhere to it and others come in and imitate it, well, it does water it down. It sort of blurs the line, and I think it detracts from all the effort, all the care that's gone into making the original, to doing the thing that was the best. When you were talking about your dad and coaching, I was just thinking about what it takes to actually be a great coach. Whether it's coaching someone personally, professionally, or in sports, man, good coaches give of themselves far beyond anything that we see. We see the result, but we don't see what goes into it. We don't see all of the work that happens behind the scenes. We don't understand the thought process because it occupies people's minds. And I know in reading about what some of these small vintners go through, what they think about, the fact that you're kind of at the elements. Those are the things that are going to rule the day. When you're making wine, you can't control if there's a frost or not. You can't control if there's a hailstorm or not. And their job is to try to do the very best they can with the fruit that they have when it's time to harvest. And that's what I admire about these small producers that adhere to all the rules. And some of those rules include, when you can water or not, what fertilizer you can use or not. There's all sorts of things that go into it. And these oftentimes families, generational families, are given their all out there to try to make the very best product that they can within the confines of those rules. And then others can come along and imitate it. Most people aren't going to know. Probably most people aren't going to care. But I think it does matter. I think there's something about the old school way that is actually better. And a quick note about Prosecco. It's made from 85% glera, Glera, if I'm remembering correctly. It's a white grape. It's aromatic. It's super fruity, and they can use other grapes in smaller quantities. Champagne can only be made from Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. Just in case anyone was wondering.
You need to read that book that Ken recommended because it'll tell you the answers to what's actually inside the wines that seem similar on face value, but are actually very different. Now, I had a conversation with one of my daughters the other day about how things used to be when I was growing up. And I'm 43 years old, in case you were wondering. So not as old school as Ken. A little dig on Ken there. But I still grew up in an era that was different than obviously the era that my kids are growing up in. And we were just talking about how things used to be and how when I was growing up, that I would we'd ride bikes around the neighborhood. And when my mom wanted us to come home for dinner, she would literally ring a bell. You have to distinguish sometimes if more than one mom had bells, like what bell was ringing, but you would know, and then you could hear it from further down the street or in different areas, and you would know to come back for dinner. And I was just commenting on different rules and things. One thing, though, I'll say that's old school that should have gone the way it went is seatbelts. I had this really cool picture I saw the other day of these people going up on a gondola or on a chairlift, let's say, from like a ski resort, but this was in like summertime. And they show this this is completely, just make up the number, 500 feet in the air, like just looks the most dangerous thing you've ever seen. There's no rail to like they could pull down and block their bodies. And the mom's reaching out, kind of like blocking the kid with her arm. And I'm thinking, that looks really dangerous. And I remember being told that, obviously, I didn't live before seatbelts, but before car seats, right? Like a baby would sometimes just sit on the lap of the person. They just kind of put their arms around them. Or I think when the first seatbelts ever was like literally like a bucket that the little kid would sit in a bucket and they just kind of put the seatbelt over top of this little like bucket seat that the kid would sit in. At any rate, some things have gotten better, and the old school is not necessarily how it should be today. So some safety things. But I also say that part of the old school that made it really cool was that because the exposure to real life, I think there was a resilience that was built in a lot of people, right? Like you had more exposure to literally, I'm not encouraging this, but fight it out. Like there was a disagreement. It wouldn't be like, let's the parents step in and sue each other and press charges and like make a big issue out of it. It'd be like, what'd you do about it? Maybe you should punch that kid in the face, right? And then you have to like, you fight it out. And then at the end, like you bandage up your bruises and you go, hey, and your buddies, and you move on, and then like life happens, but you kind of work it out. Where now I think we're a little bit too protective of both like, oh, don't be exposed to any germs, or don't be exposed to a risk that could make your life uneasy. But I think that uneasiness of life, the way it used to be a little bit, the ability to kind of work it out on your own or be exposed to some risk, while I'm not proposing the risk of no seatbelts, I am proposing the risk of like, get out there and experience life, work things out, right? Like put yourself a little bit at risk, because that's how you grow as an individual. So there's a lot of the old school I like, except for the one thing of seatbelts and safety.
I'm with you on the seatbelt thing. And I remember photos that my mom had showed me of, I think it was Sun Valley during the summertime, going up the ski lift. And literally, the only thing that they considered a safety feature was that the seat was slightly tipped back. And as long as you didn't move, you were safe from falling 500 feet to your death. But other than that, there was no protection whatsoever. Um, I agree about the risk piece too, and I know this is I'm not a parent, so I don't have kids. I don't know what this is like for parents nowadays. But man, we played, we fell down, we got cuts, we got bruises, we had arguments, and the response was usually what you said: work it out, solve it yourselves. Is a problem, you need to learn how to fix problems. I'm not going to fix it for you. And we would have to do that, and it was weird and uncomfortable, and I couldn't understand why like mom or dad wouldn't just like make it good. But after a while you start developing a sense of like, oh, this is serious and it matters, and this is not that serious and it doesn't matter, or I can solve this, I can figure it out, or that cut's not that bad, or oh, that broken arm, that's bad, I need to go in. This is one that does require mom. But we had it, we kind of got good at like triage. It's like, what mattered, what was important, what was serious. It's not all ranked the same. I think this goes back to what you were talking about with like, you finished last and eighth, but you get a prize for eighth place. It's like, no, everything's not equal. Things are different, right? And there was something pretty great about developing a fluency for what matters and what's important and what's serious and the stuff that just isn't. And I think that's what I really appreciated about playtime after school. We came home, we were lucky, lived in a nice neighborhood, great neighbors, big yards. We'd climb trees, we'd build forts, we'd literally make up game shows and like enact them. We did all sorts of stuff, but so many great lessons about how to work together, and the fact that we ultimately had to solve our own problems. It was great training for becoming an adult.
So my mom sends out a daily, like the saint of the day, and she'll talk about, she'll include some prayer, and she'll give kind of an update on what's going on with my parents' lives and things like that. So one of the things this week was there was the Saint Francis Xavier and his feast day. And so the name Xavier was the name of my great grandfather. And my dad actually grew up with his grandparents. And he mentioned in it a couple things that I thought are very old school. So one of the things was after dinner every night, my dad had to go out to the garden and work in the garden. So they had a garden in the back of their home. And then I just thought that was very interesting. My dad was saying he didn't even get to play baseball. And this is a first world problem, but until he was 13 years old, and he could hear the kids down the street, like playing baseball, like at the field. And he always wanted to do that. But his literal grandparents grew up, they were born in the 1800s. They were very old school. He worked as a butcher. He literally brought blocks of ice that they took out of water and made blocks of ice and brought them for ice boxes, like for the OG refrigerators, right? To cool the meat. So they not only took the meats, and there were butchers and like would take that, but they would get the ice that they'd keep the meat on to keep it as fresh as they could, as long as they could. But my dad just doing that was reminding me of like how old school things would be. And then this was also interesting to me, just a family fact, but very old school, was in the community, they had a business school in Ohio where they grew up. And my grandfather was offered to go after high school to go to business school. And he said, no, you know what I'd rather do with the money? I'd rather go to dancing school. So supposedly his name was Xavier, but they called him Zig because like I guess like a jig, but like Zig, because he really was into dancing. I never knew that, but that's a family fact that I learned this week. So I was like, that's amazing. So just an appreciation for old people who grew up in this older time where things were a lot different, and just an appreciation for, I think, getting out in the world and doing different things and not just towing the line that we all now seek of like, this is the way it's supposed to be, but they were living the way life was at the time.
So I want to circle back to something because I just think it's so important as we're talking about all this, and that's that notion of standards. Like, you can set those for yourself too. People may imitate you. They say it's the highest form of flattery. I think that's probably accurate. if you weren't doing something great or doing something well or doing something that other people wanted, nobody would imitate what you're doing. Nobody was going to come after you. So it's a great confirmation that you're on the right path. Don't do that for somebody else, though. Find your own path. Like, make it your own. Let you be the one who's imitated because you followed the rules. You played by the book. You did what was supposed to be done. That's the seemingly old school part that I really miss. And Dan is right. I'm about 150 years older than he is. So back in the day, there was just like this expectation, this is the way it is. This is the way you do it. And it doesn't mean don't innovate. And it doesn't mean, don't look at ways to experiment, but man, be the original yourself. Let other people be the imitator. Let somebody else be the sparkling wine and make a case for it. Let them do it and make a case for it. You be the champagne though, right? You be that thing that is utterly, completely, and totally the original. Be that thing that requires super high standards to produce. Be that thing that not everyone can do, because you're the only one that's got the gift to be able to do it. You're the one that's willing to put in the blood, sweat, and tears to make it happen. You're the one who's willing to, go out and work when you hear your friends at play. You're the one who's willing to do that kind of work to produce a result that other people are going to want to imitate.